Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar. The webinar today is with Abbeyfield, so Jonathan from Abbeyfield, who in our annual complaints review for 23-24 were one of only 2 organisations in the report without any maladministration findings. So we're joined today by Jonathan Earnshaw. He's a complaints manager at Abbeyfield, and he's going to be providing an overview of what Abbeyfield are doing to make sure it has such a low mal rate, share what it's doing and is working well within the organisation, as well as share what's happening and what's going well so the landlords can learn and improve. So thanks for joining us today. This webinar is hosted by us at the Housing Ombudsman Service, and my name is Victoria King, one of Sector Learning and Development Leads here. Just a few housekeeping bits before I hand over. Please could I ask that you stay on mute, but you can keep cameras on if you're happy to. After the session today, we'll as we're recording this session, we'll upload this to the Centre for Learning so you can watch it back and share with colleagues. And we've also got an evaluation form which we'll put into the chat at the end. So if you could give us that feedback, that'd be amazing, because we want to make sure that these webinars are still meeting all of your needs. So as I've mentioned, we've got Jonathan here from Abbeyfield. He's got a presentation for us for about half an hour, and then for the rest of the hour we'll go to questions. So if you do think of anything as Jonathan's presenting or afterwards, feel free to add that to the chat and I'll facilitate these at the end so Jonathan can answer. You also have an opportunity to raise your hands at the end as well if you want to ask a question. So as I mentioned, Jonathan will be leading the session today. So Jonathan, I'll hand over to you now so you can introduce yourself and start your presentation, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria. And good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to the Housing Ombudsman's webinar to hear about the Abbeyfield Living Society's complaints journey, and I'm hopefully going to take you through some of the highs and some of the challenges we've experienced over the next hour, and hear also your stories, and hopefully the information I've got to share will sort of lead to some discussions and some comments. So I'll get on and start to share the presentation. I'm sure some of you will have heard of the Abbeyfield Living Society, but as always in these types of sessions, I'll start off with a little bit of a story about our background. So do bear with me. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah,
thanks, Victoria. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you. As I said, you'll hear a bit more about our story and our journey, but this is our complaints journey. So let me start off. So very much, and I just want to make sure I can see everybody as well in the chat. You will have heard, I'm sure, in the housing sector about Richard Cargon. He formed Abbeyfield, the Abbeyfield vision, if you like, back in 1955 when he purchased his first house in Bermondsey in East London. And actually, Abbeyfield as an organisation was then established in 1956. His vision was very clear. It's on the screen there. It was very much around to bring lonely people together in an ordinary house, in an ordinary street, getting support and creating an atmosphere of companionship from neighbours and family, returning to the community rather than moving away from it. So Abbeyfield is very much about being in the heart of our communities where we have our services. His vision, very proudly, was, wouldn't it be great if we could have an Abbeyfield house on every street in which everyone could come? And I'm sure with working in housing as we do, you'll know Richard Cargon, you'll know about his vision, and you know about the Abbeyfield difference that he was very, very keen to promote. Today in Abbeyfield, we have 50 welcoming homes across England. We have some very clear principles which set out our stall very, very clearly, which is around over 55s. We know that over 55s are particularly susceptible to isolation. So what we've created is homes that are very welcoming, where residents can build friendships and can experience fulfilling lives through supporting relationships with each other, but with staff, volunteers and the wider community. We offer personalised care and support in most of those homes where they can residents receive dedicated support in a very secure and comfortable home setting. And actually, we offer a range of different services tailored to individual needs based within those services. So it's very much about independent living. Critcher Cargon was very, very passionate, as you saw on that first slide, about the volunteering spirit. And today is very much still the case. We have countless volunteers that make time for older people. So individuals from within our communities contribute their time and skills to support our services and to support our residents live a very independent life. As I said in the earlier slide, we are at the heart of our communities. So each Abbeyfield location is set in the heart of its local community. We recruit actively local volunteers, collaborate with other organisations, and we work with residents, as you'll hear about a bit later on in the presentation, to participate and create that sense of purpose and offering the opportunities for companionship and friendship. So really, very powerful deliverables. Just to hammer home the point a bit more, we know that our residents, as you will do in your organisations, are at the heart of the organisation, no different here in Abbeyfield. We know that they play a key role in helping to ensure our services remain resident focused, and you'll hear a bit more about that also in the presentation. We know, as you will do in your organisations, the positive differences residents can make when they're engaged with their landlord. Something we'll absolutely all champion, I know. And our residents experience the services because they experience the services that we deliver on a daily basis. So they are the ones who can be that critical friend and can challenge us when we get things not quite right, and ultimately lead to improving our services. So where I'm taking you to sort of towards the end of our journey, but we will retrace our steps back. So in November 2024, we received what I can only describe as a really positive statement from Richard Blakewell. He said to us in Abbeyfield last November, in 2023-24, there was no maladministration for us as an organisation from the complaint cases the Housing Ombudsman had reviewed, and we'll talk a bit about those cases in a second. Based on the case reviews in 23-24, he confirmed it indicates a positive complaint handling culture within your organisation. So I've sort of taken you towards the end of our story because actually before we had that statement from Richard, we'd been doing lots of work around the complaint handling culture in the organisation and our own journey. And that's what I'll be talking to you about this morning. But to receive such a statement, as I'm sure you will imagine when you receive one in the future, is a real positive support for the organisation, to recognise the determination and the efforts that have been put in place by that organisation. And actually, it allowed us to, yes, recognise and celebrate it, but also not to rest on our laurels, to actually think about what we wanted to do next and how we further wanted to improve. So it really gave us that momentum to keep up the focus and keep up the pressure to further improve as an organisation. But a really, really positive statement to receive. There were two cases, and I'm taking you on the journey now back to what the work we did, but the two cases that the Housing Ombudsman identified, and I know Victoria will post the links to these in the chat just to support you so you can look at the cases in more detail. But we had two cases which the Housing Ombudsman reviewed in this period 23-24. And they were specifically around, in this particular case, 202.127.722, was some very specific things around the residents. So this is actually going back as to 2021, 2022. But the residents' concerns in this particular case were about some fire safety related issues, in particular around a stair lift in the property and the external fire escape. And you'll see when we come on to the other case, they are very linked, and there's a very clear reason why that is so. The residents' concerns were also about the suitability of a neighbouring tenant in the building, and the residents' concerns about the treatment of staff in relation to COVID vaccinations, if we can all think back to that period as as well. So the determination was clear, there was no maladministration in the areas, but the learnings for us in that particular case as we worked through it was very much at the time making sure we had all the evidence, and haven't we heard that so many times in the past? But for us, this was very important in this particular case, because we were able to share with the Housing Ombudsman issues about our successful fire drills that we'd held at the property. We'd also been able to engage with the fire risk manager that we had internally, but also externally with the fire service. And we actually were able to demonstrate in evidence as part of this case review the work that we'd actually conducted with the external stairlift contractor as well. So there's lots of evidence in that case, and that's something we know, don't we, as part of the sector, that having the evidence, having it documented, having that audit trail is really critical in complaint cases as they progress through our internal complaints process. That was no different here. We were able to have all the evidence, make sure all our ducks were in a row. We were able to demonstrate through the internal process the work we'd done to try and reassure the residents and to make sure that they felt satisfied with the steps that we'd taken. Now, interestingly, when we get to the issue about the suitability of a neighbouring tenant, obviously there's very limited information we could share. Now, in this particular example, the resident was concerned about the declining health of a fellow resident and felt actually that resident needed to be moved to a different part of the building, to a ground floor flat in this particular case. Now, obviously, that's something we wouldn't be able to go into in great detail with the complainant in this particular example, but we were able to demonstrate to the Housing Ombudsman the steps we'd taken to support the resident with their independent living aspects. So, and work with the resident and the family to make sure they felt supported, and we were keeping their particular care needs under close review. Now, actually, in this example, the resident, the complainant was mentioning, actually decided under their own steam to move to a property which they felt was more suitable for them in another part of the building. So you could argue, yes, the complainant probably achieved the results they were seeking at that particular time. But actually, we were able to reassure the residents and ultimately the Housing Ombudsman that we were carrying out all the relevant care assessment needs. We were working with the family, we were working with external agencies, and we were working with the residents to make sure that they felt very supported in making sure they receive the care that they absolutely deserve to receive. In the relation to the COVID vaccinations, and very quickly on this, the complainant was concerned that the organisation was putting staff under pressure to receive a COVID vaccination, even if they chose to or not to. That wasn't proved in this case. There was no evidence to suggest that was happening. We followed government guidance as it would have been at the time, and actually invited our staff members to participate in the COVID vaccination programme as well. So the bottom line here is we had all the evidence, we could demonstrate all the checks and assessments we completed, all the work we'd done with external partners, and it was making sure that was absolutely as watertight as it could be, making sure we'd followed procedures, we'd completed those external checks, we'd had those external discussions, and our documents could demonstrate the work we'd done as part of the internal complaints process. So very relieved with all those things in place. The Housing Ombudsman actually felt we'd handled the case very reasonably indeed. In the other case, which they also looked at as part of the 23-24 cycle, this was also around some residents' concerns about the use of a stairlift in the property. And this again was making sure we could demonstrate with the relevant assessments and the relevant checks we'd completed. We'd worked with the stairlift contractor, our health and safety team, the local manager, the regional operations manager. And there were also some concerns here about the emergency fire escape lighting being left on permanently. This particular complainant didn't like that, but actually we brought in the external fire service who were able to reassure the resident that was a safety requirement. It was good practice, and it was important that that emergency lighting in the fire escape was left on permanently, which actually in this particular case, the Ombudsman supported us was with because it was based on external advice from the professionals. There was no evidence, even though there was no evidence here of a, as it says here on the screen, a member of staff had behaved in a discriminatory way while this was progressing through the internal process. There was no evidence to suggest that, and obviously there was no maladministration found in that case. But it did demonstrate to us again through our internal processes that we'd investigated the complaint fully. We'd followed procedures, and we'd got all the relevant evidence and the experts' evidence in place, which we could then share with the Housing Ombudsman. So that's what led to the statement in November 2024. So where did we start from? Well, as an organisation, and this may be true in some other housing organisations, I would say we had a reactive culture, which meant really that we were dealing with things as they came up. There wasn't really any intelligence coming through of potential issues that were brewing. So we weren't getting the first word on the street from one of our colleagues in operations, maybe, or from property services, the things that they were dealing with in our services. So it was very much a reactive. As it came up, we would deal with it, we would respond, and we would take that forward. That also in itself promoted silo working. So we're all in housing for the right reasons. We want to absolutely champion residents and their rights, and we want to make sure that they're living in a safe and independent way, in particular here to Abbeyfield. But that means that we actually then work in our bubbles. So we work in silos. So we're all doing a good job, but actually we're not sharing any of that information with each other. We're not, as I say, not necessarily sharing the things that might be brewing or that we need to put on people's radars that we can get on and fix. And actually, we started from a position where in our complaints process, our complaint responses were mainly provided exclusively by the leadership team. So that actually then removed our local managers from the complaints process and actually didn't give them the oversight that they needed to be able to be aware of issues, to be aware of things that were going on in their own estates and houses, and actually could play a very active role in trying to resolve the complaints. So that was a very, very big understanding and learning for us. So where did it take us? Well, the first thing we actually did was launch what we called a national conversation on complaints. It sounds quite grand, but it was very much reconnecting with our people in operations. So talking to our managers, our regional team, our property services and financial colleagues about the importance of complaints, the role that complaints have in driving service improvements. And that was the big, big deciding factor here. So we had a national conversation on complaints. It involved our CEO. It involved our executive team. They were behind it 100%, which is really critical to drive changes in your complaints culture. But what they did, we talked to them about the importance of complaints, our complaints procedure to remind them, because often I would call a colleague in operations and the fear of God sometimes would be placed into them and thinking, we've had a complaint, what does it mean? Occasionally could become quite defensive, spotlights on that particular service. But that's not what an effective complaints culture should be about. It's about, yes, we've got an issue, yes, we need to fix it, but actually what do we need to do to take those steps? How can we work collaboratively together to make sure we understanding what's happened, how we plug the gap, and we use the lessons learned to drive the service improvements forward. So that was very much a national conversation on complaints, re-educating our people, sharing information about complaints and the lessons learned we've taken from them, but also sharing best practice from the sector. And a bit of a plug here to the Housing Ombudsman, because actually we showcase lots of their webinars and lots of their Centre for Learning activity to actually share with all our colleagues. So it's internally available to all our colleagues to participate and understand what else is going on in the sector and what does good practice look like. But alongside that, we also launched some new complaints handling training. So that involved doing an e-learning course for all our colleagues, which is refreshed every year. It reminds everyone about the basics, but hammers home the really important points of service improvements and best practice sharing. So really, really key for some of that. And we've also followed that through with some webinars, which take questions, share best practice, see what else is going on in our organisation. So, for example, I go every month to our regional operations meetings, and we talk about what's the word on the street. What's things are they seeing as local managers that might be nipped in the bud, might be very really quick fixes, but are we starting to see any themes or trends that are coming through that in another house they also might be seeing? So it's very much continuing that theme of the national conversation of complaints. We devised some new reporting. So we were able to share about not just about volumes, because yes, volumes are important, but actually what's the story behind the numbers? What does good practice look like? What's the lessons learned? What do we need to share that's relevant to that particular complaint? And we have those reports now in place. And we devised a new complaints toolkit. Our internal intranet is called Connect. You will have something very similar, I'm sure, but we devised a complaints toolkit. We found that things related to complaints were in different places on our intranet, and we actually wanted to bring it all together into one place, which we did. We called it a complaints toolkit. We had a dedicated page. It was easy to find, a couple of clicks, and everything relating to effective complaint handling was in the one place. And our colleagues told us that was a huge help in trying to find information quickly. If it was just to check what the complaints procedure is, where they needed to reach out to get some support, whatever it would be, any training that they needed to complete, any webinars that they needed to look at, what best practice looked at, it was all in one place and it saved our colleagues a lot of time. We obviously, as you will have done, last year, we published our annual complaints and service improvement plan. That was really critical for us because actually that plan will also get signed off by our customer committee and our residents panel. They get sight of that. Our customer committee is made up of our executive team members, and actually they can live and breathe the progress we've made in that year, but also the changes we're also implementing as part of our wider complaints improvement plan. And externally, because obviously we have to share, don't we, our reports through our external outlets, we created a dedicated compliments and complaints page on the website. Because yes, absolutely, complaints culture needed a fresh look. We also wanted to drive and improve how we receive feedback about the great things that we do as an organisation. So we now talk about compliments and complaints in the same conversation, and we encourage that feedback in through our external website. So as I've talked about, really, we created greater collaborative learning and working approaches. We were silo busting. So by having those meetings, by having those regular check-ins with our colleagues, we could see things that were coming down the track. We could see property issues that were causing residents some pain. And it could have been on damp and mould, for example. But we had the first sight of those to work collaboratively to understand what our colleagues in property services were doing, or if there was a change in service charges or care fees, we could understand where those were going to be applied, and we could work with our colleagues to make sure that they were implemented appropriately. So it's very much that very hand-holding, joined-up approach, collaboratively working together. But at the same time, we launched a brand new lessons learned approach, which might not sound radical at all, but actually for us it was, because actually, yes, the numbers are important about the number of complaints you have, but sitting behind the numbers, really, really important is what's the backstory. So after every complaint now, we have a Teams call, which we review the responses that we've been issued, whether it's at stage 1 or stage 2. We review those. We capture the learnings from those. So what went well, what didn't, what could we do differently? What do we want to share with the organisation more widely? Was it just a local issue, or is it a national issue that we need to make colleagues aware about? So those lessons learned approaches are really, really important. So we have those calls, we capture them, we track them, and we assign owners to each of the actions that have been agreed. And then we follow them through to implementation. So it's not just we've identified an action, now please go away and do it. we actually track it and see it through to completion. And then we talk to residents and colleagues about them. So what changes have we made as a result of complaints learning and complaints generally that we've identified through this approach? And that's having some really great successes for us. It could be a change to policy or procedure. It could identify things with particular contractors in parts of the country which are causing us some pain regarding repairs. And we can identify and work with them to fix those issues. And it's having some real good results for us. And we're really pleased with how that's progressing. I mentioned earlier we collaborate with our residents panels. This is a panel of residents who have got a real interest in helping the organisation grow and learn and improve. And actually, we have an internal complaints working group from the residents panel. So they talk to us they review some complaint responses, the redacted, of course. We talk to them about the lessons learned, but they review our policies and framework. And actually, they also now are starting to look at some of our reporting, what the things that they would like to see and learn more about. That could be complaint deep dives, for example, where we're looking at specific areas that we found are a bit of a pain area for us. The residents panel are very interested in understanding the changes we've made from those. And as I say, we do quarterly reporting to our customer committee, our residents panel. We have a corporate quality committee, and obviously we publish our complaint handling performance on our website. So that's not just once a year, as the Housing Ombudsman would say. We actually publish our quarterly reports on our website as well as sharing internally with colleagues. So if we want to get the information out there, we want to tell our story about the things that we're doing as a result of complaints, which is really, really encouraging and really, really positive. We've also launched, as part of our national conversation on complaints, a resident commitment charter. Again, that might not sound very new or very groundbreaking, and we have got a copy of it, which I'll show you in a second. But it really focused our minds on the importance of those commitments we make to residents, building that mutual trust, building the respect, building that relationship, which is really, really important. Because in effect, that's what we also did with colleagues. We're starting to empower our colleagues. Our colleagues on the front line in our houses generally have the answers, and we can work with them and support them to try and plug things, quick things, nip things in the bud really, really quickly, that kind of thing. So we actually, as part of the national conversation on complaints, we found we were empowering colleagues. We were giving them the information, we were giving them the tools to be able to handle complaints more effectively, which is what the whole cultural shift was about, as well as building those relationships with our residents. So some of the ongoing work we do, we have customer complaint drop-in sessions with our colleagues, which we do every month, which is very much about colleagues saying the things that they're finding in their locations, actually able to ask questions, and also share with us some best practice that they're doing locally as well. So we can actually think about sharing that to benefit our colleagues nationally. We've created new We Welcome Your Feedback posters for all our locations, which is not just a complaints procedure on the board. It's a very sort of encouraging poster, giving the options for residents to be able to give us feedback, not just residents, but their families and visitors. And actually, we've taken that a little bit further now. We've now got a new leaflet, which we're in the final stages of developing, which will be in our houses as well. So this will be something our residents, visitors and families can pick up without having to ask for it. They can free post it back to us, and it creates another route in which they can share us and give us some information about the services that we provide. And to wrap all that together, we ask very much for once the complaint has been through our internal process, we ask for the views of our complainants through a complaint satisfaction survey. So again, this is something I'm particularly really keen about, is using the experiences, what went well, what didn't go well, what could we do different the next time? And that's really important as part of our satisfaction survey cycle each year, is understanding exactly what went well. So we issue those surveys on the completion of a complaint, and we receive those back in from our complainants. Mentioned the resident commitment, and I think Victoria will probably share this as well as a link. because you might want to examine it in more detail. I'm really happy to share it here and in the chat. But this was very much devised with working in a partnership with our residents. So it was built on 6 principles, and the mutual respect is at the heart of the commitment, because actually working with the residents panel, we identified these are the things that our residents really important to them. So respect being there, we talk about fostering a mutual respect between residents and staff, really important. And we respect the diverse needs and the values of all the Abbeyfield family. But communication is really in there as well, as you would expect. We will listen to what you say as a resident, encourage an open dialogue. And that's something that's really important to me as the complaints manager, is hearing firsthand from our residents of when something's gone wrong and how quickly we put it right, because that's the key here, is nipping things in the bud, fixing things as quickly as possible. We talk about safety and being responsive. So in responsive, we will reply to you in a reasonable time, and we will agree timescales for responses with you. So as you will find in your organisations, like we do, is if a complaint is going to take longer than our 10 working days, we try and inform residents as quickly as possible, not on day 10, but as quickly as possible that it's going to take longer. And we explain why, and we tell them when they can expect to hear from us again. Really good principles of the complaint handling code, of course, but just keeping residents in the loop, because there's nothing worse. And as a complainant myself, you want to know what's going on behind the scenes, don't you? You want to hear what the organisation is doing. You don't just want that wall of silence. And actually, as part of this commitment, and as I've mentioned already, we will share truthfully with you how we are performing and share what we are doing to improve. So that's very much around our complaints, but also in other areas of the organisation. And as I say, we share our quarterly complaint performance information on our website. And learning, which is I've talked a little bit about in this presentation, but we will acknowledge when we make a mistake, because mistakes happen. But we will learn from them, and we will drive improvements in the services. And that's also the key, is what have we learned from complaints? What did we do about it? And what did we change as a result of the clear complaints culture that we have? So again, I know the link to this is in the chat. So through some of all of that work, what does it look like? So absolutely high involvement from our colleagues and our residents, high collaboration model. So that's very much about empowering colleagues, giving them the information, giving them the tools, working collaboratively with them, having regular meetings, as I do every week with the property services team. What's coming down the track? What do we need to know about? Where have we got some problem areas that we need to tackle and make sure residents are updated about? Silo busting. So cut out the silo, working in bubbles, create that proactive culture by working collaboratively with each other. We created a knowledge hub, so together we could develop the training and skills and the information our colleagues wanted to see. And that's been really key, because actually we talk to our colleagues all the time. What's missing? What training would you like to see? What area would you like us to focus on is really important here. And through our lessons learned approach is listen, learn, and take action. So very much being able to capture the information, we learn about it, but we take action with it, and being able to demonstrate what those learnings look like is really important and really key. And all of those things knit together to create the really positive resident engagement, involvement, and the positive feedback culture which we're absolutely determined to fulfill. So making sure we're talking to residents, we're giving them the right information, we're giving them the correct information, we are recognising when something goes wrong, we apologise for it, we proactively look out for the things that we can fix, that we can snip in the bud before it happens. But yeah, very much looking like what the journey is taking us on. And that is it. Hopefully there's some tidbits and some bits and pieces in there which have been helpful and hopefully created some talking points along the way too.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really, really interesting. Really great. Thank you. Now, we've had a few questions. So I'll go through them in order as they came into the chat. If anybody else has got any questions, feel free to add them into the chat now or to raise your hand. I'll go through the chat ones first and then come to the raised hands. I've got a question first, Jonathan. And it was about at the beginning, you were talking about Richard Corgom and the role of volunteers at Abbeyfield. Who can volunteer for you guys, and what type of roles can volunteers do?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's we talked very much in our communities. So our Abbeyfield houses are in our communities. For example, it could be someone could come in and do a knit and natter session. We've also, activity-based volunteers we have, whether it's some game sessions. Recently went in and we did a talking session. So we came in and like a bit of a book club in one of our houses, which was really, really useful. And it's connecting with local businesses. So, for example, we could connect with the local bookshop who actually might want to come in and work with our residents and talk to them about particular books. Obviously, there's probably some benefits in that for them too. But it creates those local links and those opportunities. And we also have befriending opportunities. So actually come in and talk to our residents on a social basis, join them for lunch, bit of companionship, bit of friendship, but also then promoting local groups. So, for example, if our residents are able to, there might be a walking group locally that they're really interested in, that might want to participate in. It's promoting those local links and those local opportunities, I think, Victoria.
Oh, brilliant, fantastic. Okay, so to the questions now from the people that are attending. So the first one is from Sue. Now it's around the first case study that you talked about, so the one ending in 7722. So Sue's question is is the failure with not receiving any maladministration, but that residents were concerned to warrant going through your complaints process and then the Housing Ombudsman Service? Clearly, the resident felt they were not being supported by your organisation, had not sufficiently explained it to the tenant's satisfaction. Does that make sense, or would you like me to rephrase?
No, that doesn't absolutely make sense. I think that's absolutely. I think Sue's right. I think even though we'd managed the complaint fully and there was no maladministration, the Housing Ombudsman said to us actually everything that we'd done was really reasonable. The resident at the end of that internal process still didn't feel they'd been listened to or engaged, which is the reason why they went to the Housing Ombudsman. So I think there's always opportunities we would look for. So yes, we give them the right information, we've been factually correct, we tried to reassure them. But obviously, one of their aspects of that was actually they would probably have thought we weren't taking any action with regards to the resident who they wanted to be moved to a different part of the building. Um, and actually, I suppose in that respect is they probably at that stage felt, what were we doing behind the scenes? So was there an opportunity for us to have given them more information? And I think even though we'd handled it absolutely within line with the procedure, there's still things we would look at in those cases to think, what information did we give to the resident? Could we have done things a little bit differently? And there will always be those opportunities because that's something we will absolutely always look out for. So I hope that helps. So in terms of, yes, there's this, even though there was no maladministration, we would always still look at it and try and find what is there something differently we could have done in that particular case.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we see that a lot, and even when there's sometimes no update, just having that communication with the resident and saying there isn't an update, but we are still on it. But I loved in that case you were talking about the importance of good record keeping and having those contemporaneous notes on the system. So when it did go to the Housing Ombudsman, that we were able to sort of look at what you have been doing. So
I think that's right, Victoria. I think we have to get into that mindset. I think, and I'll be absolutely honest. We've not necessarily always done that in the right way, which I think is we need to be brave to admit that. But actually, at the same time, what we try and do now is deep into our thinking is, should this progress through our internal process and should this extend, progress to the Housing Ombudsman, we want to try and get at stage one make sure not we're doing things as the procedure tells us to do, which is quite right, but actually what's the resident's expectations here? What do we need to give them in terms of information and reassurance that we're listening and that we're taking action? And sometimes it might be a no, and sometimes it's something we can't achieve, but factually we've given the information as well as reassuring them by understanding what their expectations are.
Thank you, Jonathan. I loved how you were talking about identifying lessons from complaints, but not just identifying lessons, but the way that the process that you go through from turning them to from lessons identified into lessons learned. And I thought that was a really good piece. If anybody takes anything from this session, I think it should be that identifying what lessons can be taken, and then the way that you captured the lessons, you assign owners to each of those lessons, and you track that lesson to make sure it is completed. And the fact that you are national, so like it could lead to policies being updated. It could be pulling out issues with contractors that can be sorted out. But it's that taking it from, all right, you found the things that have gone wrong, but what steps have you taken to actually make sure that they don't happen again? And I thought that was really great, that whole process that you explained there. And
yeah,
it's working well.
It's working very well. And I think, Victoria, we learnt the hard way, which is the reason why we made that change, which was, again, lessons learned in itself, is we would often in complaint responses make a commitment, and actually we would then leave it with our regional operations team to make sure that commitment was implemented. And actually, you'd then be the odd occasion where the resident would come back to you and say, actually, you made this commitment, but actually, I've not yet received the goodwill gesture, or I've not had a revisit from the contractor. So actually, that quite rightly got our thinking around. So how could we track these? How could we make sure, yes, we're following through on the commitments, but we're also understanding what the lessons learned are from those complaints? And I think that's our biggest takeaway, I think, from as an organisation, is being able to sit down with each other, have a very open and candid conversation. What worked well, because there's sometimes absolutely there's things that work well and that we would want to do, we would want to do the same on future complaints. But actually, what didn't go so well? What did we miss? What could we have plugged and fixed sooner? What did we not tell the resident that we should have done in the first instance to give them the reassurance that they were needing? So it's those kind of conversations. We have those very candid conversations. We absolutely extract those learnings. We assign the owners and we track them through, because we want to be able to demonstrate as a result of complaints and feedback is the changes we've made, which is really important to us. It's important to our colleagues, important to our residents, is what have we changed as a result of complaints, which is one of the key principles of having an effective complaint handling process.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So Gemma asks at 10:58. So do the Teams calls that you talked about where you're reviewing the complaints, do they on a monthly basis, do these happen after stage 2 decisions or at stage 1s as well?
Yes, they happen at stage 1s and at stage 2. So if a complaint it progresses through the process, so we'll have absolutely had a stage 1 review, and then should it progress to stage 2, we'll then have a follow-up review to understand why it progressed to stage 2. What was the motivation behind that, and actually what could we have done differently at stage 1? Our drive in the organisation is very much around preventing those escalations, preventing moving to stage 2, because we know that prolongs the process and the sometimes the inconvenience and sometimes the distress for residents. So our goal is to achieve that at stage 1. But ultimately, yes, we would do those reviews via those team calls, both at stage 1 and stage 2.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And actually, what I should say, every time we get a housing ombudsman determination, so in these two particular cases, and any further ones we've had since, we actually then reconvene the stakeholders from that complaint journey and talk to them about the determination, and go through then the same lessons learned process, which is really important, is what's even if it's a no maladministration determination, is what could we have done differently? What opportunities have we got to make sure we fulfil that on the next determination, should there be one?
Yeah, brilliant. It's looking at each complaint and regardless of that determination and pulling out
Yeah,
the learning from it. Brilliant. I love that. I love that motto: listen, learn, and take action. And you talked about your customer complaints, monthly drop-ins, and your complaint satisfaction surveys, which you send out as well.
yeah.
Sue asked just after 11 o'clock, could you share your complaint satisfaction survey? Would you be able to share the questions to those, Jonathan, if possible?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. I did put the link into the annual complaint handling service improvement report, which on page 6, it does have some of the results from those surveys in. So if you want to have a look in the meantime, everybody that's listening, that'd be great. But yeah, Jonathan, if you could share those, that would be great.
Do you want me to bob them into the chat, Victoria, at the end, or do you want me to send them? That might be the easiest thing to do, maybe.
Yeah, just put them in the chat then, and that would be great. And then I'll put them as a resource when we upload this to the Centre for Learning as well, so people can download. Okay, so the next question is from Jay. So Jay asks, what is your satisfaction rates on complaint handling from a customer's perspective?
Currently, Jay, it's around 65% based on our survey. So yes, that's better than it used to be. It used to be in the low 30s, mid 30s. So yes, it's absolutely improved, but we know, a bit like I mentioned, I think at the beginning, there's always things here that we don't rest on our laurels about, because actually we want to make sure that we can further improve that. Now, I think we'd probably all say in housing, we know we're not necessarily going to get about 100% or in that area, but actually, when you look at our annual scores, it's 65, 66, 67% that we've been achieving. So there's still work to be done, which I think hammers home the message I was saying at the beginning, which is there's always something still to do, and there's always something you can improve on, which is, I think, is also a key message of this session. Is we know there's things that we want to do differently in 3 months' time, or want to improve on. You know, the questions we ask as part of the complaint handling satisfaction survey are very much around the experience, but actually is there opportunities to further improve that. So very much we'll continue to improve and move forward on that.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for your question there, Jay. The final question, and if you've got any, add them into the chat now or pop your hand up. But the final question that we have for you at the moment is from Alex. Alex says, what, if you can think of any, from the Abbeyfield journey are some good ways to embed a positive and proactive response to complaints into daily complaint investigation and help colleagues move from being defensive and scared of complaints to embracing the learning opportunities? What a great question.
That's a brilliant question. But I think for me, it's about giving our colleagues the confidence and the information and the tools. So I know from absolutely, as Alex mentioned there, there's those behaviours will naturally come through, being defensive, being on the back foot, trying to take things a bit personally. They're natural reactions to a complaint. But what I've found, and certainly in our journey here, has been very much about encouraging that conversation, people not being afraid to pick up the phone and say, look, I've got this scenario, I'm not quite sure, I've never had it before, I don't really know what the best thing to do is that those types of conversations I've absolutely nurtured as part of our journey here, is being accessible, being available, giving our colleagues the tools. So, you know, showing them some examples of what a good response would look like, for example, the things that they can say to diffuse a situation locally if they're doing things verbally, but also making sure that they've got the confidence through some of our training, through our e-learning, through our webinars, so they feel empowered to be able to do those things. Of course, very easy for me to sit here and say that, absolutely get that. But also I've seen that from the conversations I've had with residents and with colleagues and through some of our workshops that we do throughout the year, is it's just that continuous conversation, people not being afraid of complaints, embracing them, welcoming them, understanding what happens after the complaint's been made. So actually it's the difference it makes in giving people that confidence, and it takes time. There's no two ways about it. It takes time, and actually people need to feel reassured, whether it's a colleague or a resident, that we're doing things for absolutely the right reasons. And that's the trust and the mutual respect that I talked about in the presentation, which is really important here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Right, I think that's it for questions. So thank you very much for your time today, Jonathan. It's been a really fascinating presentation and some really good questions there as well. So as we mentioned at the start, we've recorded this session and we'll upload it to the website, and we'll put the links to the resources in there as well. There is an evaluation form link in the chat. It'd be great if you could fill that in and give us your feedback on today's session so we can learn and improve these sessions, and I'll share that with Jonathan as well. Yeah, so thank you very much everybody for joining the session today. And that's it. It's time to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.